Hi friends, welcome to my channel Mechanical Study. I am Debasis Sasmal and today we are going to discuss about types of bearing and its uses. So the main purpose of bearing is to prevent direct metal to metal contact between two elements that are in relative motion. You know, our day-to-day life, like fan or a sliding door or a trolley, everything uses bearing. Where there is a motion, when there is rotating part, generally in small machines to heavy machines, bearing are used, and there are different types of bearing, and today we are going to discuss. So this prevent when you put a bearing, what bearing does is prevents friction, heat generation, and ultimately the wear and tear of parts. It also reduces energy consumption as sliding motion is replaced with low friction rolling. They also transmit the load of the rotating elements to the housing. This load may be radial, axial, or a combination of both. Uh, when the load is parallel to the bearing, it is known as the axial load. When the load is perpendicular to the bearing, it is the known as radial load. Or if a small angle is made, it may be axial, and when a rotating any machine is rotating, it contributes to both axial and radial. So a bearing is classified in these three load types: axial, radial, or a combination of both. A bearing is generally classified into two types: friction and anti-friction bearing. Frictions bearing are the general bearings and anti-frictions are the rolling bearings, because it needs very less friction, that is known as anti-friction. Okay, so today we are going to study about rolling bearing. For friction bearing or general bearing, we will get in next video. To keep the video short, today we will only going to study about rolling bearing, which is most commonly used in every area. Okay, so rolling bearing are classified into two parts: ball bearings and roller bearing. Ball bearing are of different types like deep groove ball bearing, self-aligning ball bearing, angular contact ball bearing, thrust ball bearing. Similarly, roller bearing are classified into taper roller bearing, spherical roller bearing, cylindrical roller bearing, and needle roller bearing. So what is ball bearing? Ball bearing use balls as rolling element. They are characterized by point contact between the ball and the raceways. As a rule, ball bearing can rotate very quickly but cannot support substantial load. So what it means, it one bearing got a inner race, one outer race. There are two raceways, and between that ball are sandwiched between these two races. Okay, and a cage is there to hold that ball. It is our steel ball. A cage is made so that ball cannot dislocate from its area. When a spherical ball have only point contact on a outer race or a inner race, okay, so it cannot take heavy load, but due to this they got very less friction because of point contact. So if you need speed, when that is a speed is the matter but load is not the matter, we generally used ball bearing. Hope it is clear. Now we are going to study about different types of ball bearing. First comes the deep groove ball bearing. You can see this picture. This is the deep groove ball bearing. Deep groove ball bearing are the most commonly used and features in the wide range of different applications. Thanks to their simple design, they are easy to maintain and not sensitive to operating conditions. In addition to radial forces, they absorb axial forces in both directions. Their low torque makes them suitable for high speed. Okay. Then second type is angular contact ball bearing. So the angular contact ball bearing are characterized by the contact angle. This means the forces are transferred from one raceway to the other at a particular angle. Angular contact ball bearings are therefore suitable for combined load, where high axial forces have to be transferred in addition to radial forces. Now, you can see deep groove ball bearing. The picture you notice the ball are aligned between the two raceway in the middle of this position. Okay, and here you can see the ball is little angle, so the angle of contact changes here. So by little making this angle, this makes the ball bearing so it can take high axial forces than deep groove ball bearing. Deep groove ball bearing got low, but this angle make it heavy, so that the axial forces cannot damage the bearing it can take. Now comes the self-aligning ball bearing. Self-aligning ball bearing comprise of double row of balls guided by a cage and double row inner ring raceway. Okay, but have a special features of a continuous spherical outer ring raceway, allowing the inner ring or ball complement to swivel within the outer ring. This enables a degree of self-aligning in the application. This type of bearing is recommended when problems arises with the alignment of the shaft and the housing misalignment, and the shaft could deflect. Self-aligning ball bearings are primarily suitable for absorbing radial forces. See, when you take an example of a pump and a motor. If the alignment is not perfect, okay, there is small misalignment are there. So this type of ball bearing can absorb that much load which is coming due to misalignment of the shaft. Okay. So this type of bearing takes very high radial forces. Okay. Previous angular contact ball bearing you have high axial forces, you know it is, and before the deep groove ball bearing it has high speed, it got some radial forces, some axial forces. Okay, they now differentiate between these three bearing. Deep groove ball bearing, it is the medium radial forces, medium axial forces. Now angular contact ball bearing, high axial forces, medium radial forces. Now self aligning ball bearing, what? Telling high radial forces with medium axial forces. So as per application, we have to choose which type of bearing we have to put in that machine. Okay. Now come the thrust ball bearing. Thrust ball bearing consists of two bearing discs. You see, two bearing discs with raceways from the ball. It was the thrust ball bearing were developed solely for absorbing axial forces in one direction, which means they can locate the shaft axially in one direction. Generally thrust bearing where there is a heavy axial forces is there, it is not for radial forces, but when there is a heavy axial forces is there, we have to use this bearing with other bearing, okay, or only this bearing, so this can absorb a very high axial forces than any other ball bearing, thrust ball bearing. At that case we should use this thrust ball bearing. Now come to roller bearings. Roller bearings are characterized by line contact. This type of contact means that the roller bearing has a higher load rating than the ball bearing of the same size. However, the speed ability is lower than a ball bearing due to increased friction of the contact line. Previously we see ball has only a point contact, but a roller is a cylindrical element, cylindrical, so it's got a line contact. Line contacts means it can take heavy load, and friction is also going to increase due to more contact. Okay, where there is a heavy load, we should change from ball bearing to roller bearing. Now, first type of roller bearing are spherical roller bearing. Spherical roller bearing are very robust and work on a same principle as self-aligning bearing, with the exception that they comprise spherical roller instead of ball, allowing higher load to be supported. This can compensate for misalignments between the shaft and the housing. Spherical roller bearing can absorb high radial load and moderate axial load. Okay. So where we are, when there is a misalignment, again at that time in ball bearing I also have told, but here it is the load is more that ball bearing cannot take. Load is more and small misalignment is also there. So in this case, spherical roller bearing, they can compensate a small amount of misalignment. Okay, so that the system or pump did not get damaged so quickly and bearing got a longer life. Okay, so they have a very high radial load and a moderate axial load. Next is cylindrical roller bearing. Cylindrical roller bearing use line contact between the rolling element and raceways, which optimizes the distribution of stress factor at the point of contact between the roller and the raceways. This construction means that cylindrical roller bearing have a very high radial load rating. Depending on the design, they may also be able to transmit limited amount of axial load. A cylindrical roller bearing got more contact than a spherical roller bearing. Okay, this spherical roller bearing generally absorb compensate misalignment. Okay, but when you come to cylindrical roller bearing, uh, it can absorb a much higher radial load than spherical roller bearing, but it cannot compensate the misalignment. If your alignment is no issue or the alignment is perfect and the load is much heavy, then we will go for cylindrical roller bearing. Okay, hope it's clear. Now third is taper roller bearing. Taper roller bearing have tapered raceways in the inner and outer ring with conical roller arranged between them. Due to contact angle, taper roller bearing can absorb high radial and axial force in one direction. Taper roller bearing are often fitted in pairs to support axial forces in both directions. If you see a tapered roller bearing, a little you you can know it is a very different type of bearing. If you see it physically, you can see how it is tapered type. Okay, generally it is not used in single because it can only absorb one side. Okay, one side axial forces, and but you know in machineries we have to absorb both sides. So generally this taper roller bearing comes in pair. We should have to put two taper roller bearing together so that in both direction they can absorb the axial load. And one thing, it got a very high radial load absorption. Okay, if there is a higher radial load, then we go for taper roller bearing. Now come to needle roller bearing. Needle roller bearing are the special type of cylindrical roller bearing which containing very long thin rolling element known as needle rollers. The ratio of diameter to length is between 1:3 and 1:10. Needle roller bearing have a high load rating and only suitable for radial forces. So it is same like a cylindrical roller bearing, but the cylinders are very thin and long. It come in cup shaped. In you can see any cardan shaft, there is a needle bearing used in a cup shape. It has no power to absorb axial forces. Okay, it is only suitable for radial forces, and it can carry too much load, where load is speed is not the factor but load is the factor. Needle bearing got very good load capacity, it got very high load rating, okay, and is suitable for radial forces. Okay, hope guys you have learned something from this video. Again in next video we are going to discuss about other general types bearing or special types bearing. Okay, these are the basic rolling bearing today we have discussed. Okay, if you have any doubt about this bearing, you can comment me in comment section. I'll try to clear it up. Okay, and goodbye, thank you for the whole video. Again we will meet in next video. Thank you very much.